The hum of my laptop was the only sound in the pre-dawn quiet of my home office. This was my time, the sacred space between night and day when the city outside my window was still asleep and my mind was at its sharpest, uncluttered by the noise of the world. I sipped my black coffee, the bitter heat of familiar comfort, and clicked open my email. The inbox was a tidy list of priorities, but one subject line caught my eye and held it, a snake poised to strike. Project Phoenix Audit, Assignment and Confidential Briefing. My pulse, usually a steady, reliable metronome, gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. Phoenix. A name meant to symbolize rebirth, but in my world, it meant we were sifting through ashes, looking for the spark of truth that started the fire. I opened the attached client portfolio, the PDF loading with a silent, digital sigh. My eyes, trained over a decade to find patterns in chaos, scanned the corporate structure, the financial summaries, the list of key personnel. It was a routine motion, one I'd performed 100 times. And then I saw it. The name. It wasn't just a name on a screen, it was a ghost, a key turning in a lock I'd sealed shut 2 years ago. Julian Croft. Chief Financial Officer, Croft & Sterling Holdings. The air left my lungs in a soft, involuntary rush. For a long, suspended moment, the world simply stopped. The gentle glow of my desk lamp seemed to freeze. The distant, pre-dawn hum of the city vanished. All that existed was that name, and the memory it dragged up from the depths, not as a vague recollection, but as a full sensory assault. I could suddenly smell the expensive, lemony polish of his office, feel the plush, suffocating pile of the carpet under my feet, see the cold, dismissive glint in his eyes. Julian Croft. 2 years. I glanced at the calendar on my screen, a cold, sharp clarity slicing through me. It had been 2 years to the day. 2 years since I had sat in his opulent, glass-walled office, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white, my voice a trembling but stubborn thing as I tried to speak reason to power. 2 years since he had looked at me, a junior accountant full of fire and ideals, and told me my integrity was a liability. 2 years since he had fired me for the crime of speaking up. I leaned back in my chair, the expensive leather groaning a low protest. The memory was no longer a raw, open wound. The searing pain of that day had, over time, cauterized into something else, a cold, hard, polished stone of certainty that sat in the center of my chest. I looked at my faint reflection in the dark screen of my second monitor. I saw a woman in her early 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense ponytail. She wore a simple, elegant white blouse. She looked capable. She looked in control. She looked like the kind of woman who held the power to dismantle empires with a spreadsheet. A slow, deliberate smile, devoid of warmth but full of purpose, touched my lips. Fate, it seemed, had a hell of a sense of irony. He had silenced me then, believing he was burying an inconvenient truth. Now, my silence, the quiet, meticulous, forensic work I was about to undertake, would become the most powerful weapon of truth he would ever face. My story, the one that led to this moment, didn't begin with a bang, but with a deep, almost naive belief in the inherent goodness of systems. I was Clara Rossi, a first-generation college graduate, the proud daughter of Antonio and Maria Rossi. My father was a mechanic who could diagnose an engine's ailment by sound alone, his hands permanently etched with the grime of honest work. He taught me that a job worth doing was worth doing right, that every bolt tightened, every wire connected, mattered to the whole. My mother was a seamstress, her fingers capable of transforming scraps of fabric into beautiful, sturdy garments. She showed me that integrity was in the details, the hidden stitches, the perfectly matched pattern, the strength of the seam. Their world was one of tangible results, where effort and outcome were directly linked. They had scrimped and saved, sacrificed their own comforts, to give me a shot at a different kind of life, one built not with wrenches and needles, but with numbers and ideas. When I walked through the gleaming, revolving doors of Croft & Sterling Holdings for the first time, I felt I was entering a temple. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and steel, soaring high above, filled with the soft, hushed sounds of importance. People moved with a purposeful grace, their attire expensive and sharp, their conversations a low murmur of deals and strategies. And at the center of it all was Julian Croft, the chief financial officer. He was in his late 40s then, with a head of perfectly silvered hair that spoke of distinguished age, not decay, and a smile that could disarm regulators and charm investors out of millions. He had a magnetic presence, an ability to make you feel that by being part of his team, you were part of something brilliant, something world-changing. I was hired as a junior accountant, and for the first 6 months, I was intoxicated. I drank the Kool-Aid, as they say. I worked tirelessly, often staying long after the rest of my floor had emptied, the glow of my computer screen a beacon in the dark. I survived on vending machine coffee and the intoxicating fuel of ambition. I wanted to prove myself, to validate my parents' sacrifices, to earn my place in this sleek, successful machine. My desk was a standard-issue cubicle in a sea of beige fabric walls, but I didn't mind. It was my launch pad, my command center. I personalized it with a small, framed photo of my parents, taken on their 25th anniversary, their faces creased with smiles that reached their eyes. It was my anchor, a reminder of the real world, the world of love and hard work that existed outside this glass bubble. Next to it was a resilient little jade plant my mom had given me. Something living to care for in that sterile place, she'd said. Remember to nurture things, Clara, not just numbers. I nurtured that plant and my career with equal, fierce devotion. I was assigned to the internal accounts team, and my direct supervisor was a man named Ben. He'd been with the company for over 20 years and had the weary, patient eyes of someone who had seen multiple cycles of boom and bust, of corporate restructuring and efficiency drives. He was a good man, a competent accountant, but the fire of ambition had long since banked in him, replaced by a desire for a quiet life and a secure pension. The first crack in the gleaming, perfect facade appeared not with a quake, but with a hairline fracture, so fine you could almost miss it. I was cross-referencing expense reports for one of the senior partners, a man named Arthur Finch. He was a close ally of Julian's, a slick, backslapping character who always smelled of expensive cologne and condescension. The numbers for one project, codenamed Orion, didn't quite align. There were several large, round-figure invoices from a vendor I'd never encountered before, Ether Consulting. The descriptions were laughably vague: strategic advisory services, market penetration analysis, operational streamlining. There were no deliverables attached, no meeting notes, no evidence of work product. Just a name and a number, always approved by Julian Croft's office. A small, professional alarm bell rang in the back of my mind. It was the echo of my father's voice, a job worth doing. I took the printouts to Ben. He looked at them, and I saw his whole body sag slightly, a silent, weary resignation. "Ah, the Ether files," he'd said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Clara, listen. Don't worry about those. They're special projects. Finch handles those directly with Julian. They're above our pay grade." Something in his tone, the way he suddenly couldn't meet my gaze, made the alarm bell ring louder. "But Ben, the coding is wrong," I persisted, my youthful idealism, my mother's voice whispering about the details, overriding office politics. "If this is for client development or high-level strategy, it should be under a different cost center. And the amounts, they're astronomical for just advisory services with no tangible output. It doesn't make sense from an accounting perspective." Ben had given me a look that was both sad and warning. "Clara, you're bright. You have a real future here. Don't go looking for problems where there aren't any. This place, it's like an ocean liner. You're a passenger right now. Enjoy the ride. Don't try to steer, and for God's sake, don't go poking holes in the hull just because you think you see a leak. Some things, you just have to let go." He tapped the papers with a finality that felt like a door slamming. "File it. Move on." I should have listened. It would have been the easier path, the smarter career move. But the dissonance was too great. The perfect, gleaming temple had a faint, foul odor coming from its foundation. So, I didn't move on. I started digging. Quietly, during my late nights, when the office was empty and silent, it became my secret, personal project. I wasn't on a crusade, I was just trying to reconcile the numbers, to make the puzzle pieces fit. I was, in my own stubborn way, trying to do my job right. I found more payments to Ether Consulting, all from projects overseen by Finch, all bearing Julian's electronic signature. I ran searches, did background checks. Ether Consulting had a bare-bones, template website, a P.O. box in a tax haven country, and no listed employees, no business address, no history. It was a ghost, a financial phantom. The knot in my stomach, once a small, tight thing, began to grow, cold and heavy. This wasn't just sloppy accounting. This felt deliberate, sophisticated. I expanded my search, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I started looking at other projects, other vendors with grand, airy names, Nimbus Holdings, Zephyr Partners. A pattern began to emerge from the digital noise, a trail of financial breadcrumbs that led back to a complex, deliberately obfuscated web of shell companies and inflated invoices. It was a scheme, a beautiful, elegant, and ruthless scheme, designed to siphon money out of the company, likely to fund lavish personal expenses, hide catastrophic losses, or grease the palms of silent partners. And Julian Croft, the charismatic, brilliant leader, was either a fool being played by his subordinates or, more likely, the architect. My naive belief in the system, in the inherent goodness of the temple, crumbled into dust, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I was no longer just an accountant, I was an accidental detective, and I had stumbled upon a crime. The crisis point, the moment the hairline fracture became a chasm, came during a quarterly budget review meeting. The entire department was packed into the large, window-lined conference room. Julian was at the head of the table, a maestro conducting an orchestra of numbers. His voice was a powerful, confident instrument, booming with certainty as he presented glossy slides showing impressive, soaring profits. He talked about aggressive growth, market disruption, and maximizing shareholder value. I was sitting in the back row, a small cog in this great machine, taking notes, my heart thumping a wild, frantic rhythm against my ribs that I was sure was visible through my blouse. He pointed to a specific slide, a beautifully rendered graph showing the stellar profitability of the Orion project. The same project. The one propped up by the phantom invoices from Ether Consulting. It was a lie. A beautifully designed, professionally presented, corporate lie, told with a smile to a room full of people who either didn't know or didn't care. My mouth went completely dry. I thought of my father, his face smudged with grease, believing his daughter was in a place of honor. I thought of my mother, her hands sore from sewing, so proud of my important job. I thought of the other junior staff, their salaries stagnant while this was happening. I thought of the shareholders, the teachers and firefighters and retirees with their pensions invested in this company, trusting the glossy reports. And before the cautious, self-preserving part of my brain could wrestle control, my hand went up. It felt like someone else was lifting it. The room, which had been filled with the respectful silence of an audience, went utterly quiet. A junior accountant did not speak in these meetings. It was not done. Julian's smile widened, becoming patronizing, a king amused by a court jester. Yes. We have a question from Clara, isn't it? I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of water. The eyes of the entire room were on me, a physical weight. Mr. Croft, I began, my voice betraying me with a slight tremble I desperately tried to control. Regarding the revenue stream from the Orion project on slide 7. I've been conducting a detailed review of the underlying expense reports, and there seem to be some significant discrepancies associated with one of the primary vendors, Ether Consulting. The accounting coding appears to be inconsistent with the nature of the expenses, and there's a complete absence of supporting documentation to substantiate the services rendered. Given the materiality of these amounts, I was wondering if we could clarify the nature of these specific expenses for the record? The silence that followed was profound, heavy enough to crush bone. Julian's smile didn't falter, but it became a rigid, porcelain mask. His eyes, however, which a moment before had been twinkling with confidence, turned flat and cold, like the eyes of a shark. Thank you for your diligence, Clara, he said, his voice dripping with a condescension so thick you could almost see it. Those transactions relate to high-level, proprietary strategic partnerships. The granular details are confidential and commercially sensitive. We don't need to trouble the entire room with junior-level bookkeeping queries that have already been reconciled at the executive level. A few sycophantic, nervous chuckles rippled through the audience, a wave of collective relief that it was me, not them, in the crosshairs. My face burned with a humiliation so intense I felt dizzy. He had not only dismissed me, he had publicly framed my integrity, my commitment to the very principles of our profession, as petty, ignorant nitpicking. The summons came less than an hour later. His assistant, Marcia, a severe woman whose face seemed permanently set in a frown of disapproval, appeared at the entrance to my cubicle. "Mr. Croft would like to see you in his office." No. It wasn't a request. Walking the long, plushly carpeted hallway to Julian Croft's corner office was like a walk to the gallows. The office was a statement of power. Expensive, abstract art hung on the walls. A vast desk of gleaming, dark wood dominated the room. The entire far wall was glass, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city skyline. He was standing by the window, his back to me, a silhouette against the sprawling urban landscape. He didn't turn around for a full minute, letting the silence stretch, letting me feel the immense, insignificant space I occupied in his world. "Clara," he finally said, turning slowly. He didn't smile. He gestured to the single chair positioned in front of his desk, a supplicant's chair. "Sit." I sat, perching on the very edge, my back ramrod straight, my hands folded in my lap to hide their shaking. "I have to say, I'm disappointed," he began, leaning casually against the front of his desk, looking down at me. He was close enough that I could smell his cologne, something sharp and expensive. "I brought you into this firm because I saw potential. A spark of intelligence. But it seems you've mistaken that spark for a license to disrupt well-established processes and question the judgment of your superiors." "I wasn't trying to disrupt, sir," I said, my voice sounding small and weak in the vast room. "I was just following a discrepancy. The numbers for Ether Consulting don't make sense. There's no paper trail, no evidence of work product. From a strict auditing perspective, it presents the appearance of being fraudulent." The word, fraudulent, hung in the air between us, stark and dangerous. Julian's face hardened, the last vestiges of pleasantry evaporating. "Fraudulent?" he repeated softly, the word a venomous whisper. "That is a very, very serious accusation to level, Clara. A career-ending accusation, especially from a very junior employee who has precisely zero context for the complex, strategic financial engineering that happens at this level." He pushed off the desk and started to pace slowly behind it, a predator circling. "You see, in the real world of high finance, sometimes you have to be pragmatic. You have to see the bigger, strategic picture. What you're simplistically labeling as fraud is, in reality, part of a larger, more sophisticated capital management strategy that you are simply not equipped, nor authorized, to understand. A strategy that involves fake companies and inflated invoices to hide the true financial state of a project?" The words were out, blunt and unvarnished, before I could stop them. My mother's voice, always insisting on the plain truth. He stopped pacing and stared at me, his eyes like chips of glacial ice. "You are standing at a crossroads, Clara. You can choose to be a team player. You can learn from this, trust the experience of your leaders, and go on to have a very long and successful career within this organization. Or," he said, leaning his knuckles on the desk and bringing his face closer to mine, "you can choose to be a liability. Your rigid, schoolgirl, righteousness is a liability. It creates distrust. It undermines the unified authority of this leadership team. In this firm, we value loyalty above all else. So, I'm going to ask you one more time. Can you be a team player? Can you let this ether matter go? Can you file it away and move on with your job?" I looked at him, at his perfectly tailored suit, his cold, confident eyes that held not a flicker of doubt. I thought of Ben's weary, paternal warning. I thought of my parents' faces, their belief in me. And I knew, with a sinking, absolute certainty, that I could not. My integrity wasn't a costume I could take off at the office door. It was my skeleton, it held me up. To abandon it would be to collapse. I can't just ignore it, Mr. Croft, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. It's wrong. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected nothing less from someone he considered a simpleton. He straightened up, his expression one of cold finality. He walked back to his desk, pressed a button on his intercom. Marcia, could you please prepare Clara Rossi's termination paperwork? Effective immediately. Security will escort her out. The words termination and escort her out didn't feel real. They were phrases from a movie, not my life. You're firing me? I said, the stunned disbelief clear in my voice. No, Clara, he said, settling back into his throne-like chair, a faint, cruel smile playing on his lips. You're firing yourself. You've made it abundantly clear that your rigid, simplistic, textbook view of ethics is fundamentally incompatible with the dynamic, forward-thinking culture of this company. Clean out your desk. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Do not attempt to contact any other employees. The walk of shame out of that building was the longest and most humiliating journey of my life. Marcia watched me with pitiless eyes as I placed the photo of my parents and my jade plant into a small cardboard box. The plant seemed to mock me with its vibrant green life in that moment of professional death. A uniformed security guard stood a few feet away, his presence a final, degrading stamp on the proceedings. I could feel the stares from my former colleagues, averted eyes, whispered conversations, a mixture of pity, fear, and secret relief that it wasn't them. I didn't cry. I was too numb, too hollowed out by the sheer, brutal injustice of it. The gleaming temple of glass and steel had revealed itself to be a gilded cage, and I was being thrown out for rattling the bars. The months that followed were a deep, bleak winter of the soul. The official reason for my termination, not a good cultural fit, was a poison pill in my resume. It followed me to every interview. We're looking for someone who is more of a team player, one potential employer said, and I knew exactly what that code meant. Julian Croft had effectively blacklisted me in the city's tight-knit financial circles. My confidence, once so bright and ambitious, was shattered. The idealistic young accountant was gone, replaced by a cynical, unemployed woman who spent her days staring at the four walls of her tiny apartment, the silence broken only by the nagging voice of failure. The photo of my parents on my nightstand felt like an accusation. I had taken their sacrifices, their dreams for me, and I had let them shatter on the hard floor of Julian Croft's office. But deep down, beneath the layers of shame and anger and self-doubt, that cold, hard stone of certainty remained. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had been right. That knowledge, that tiny, unyielding ember, became my only source of warmth and light in the darkness. I made a decision. If the system was so corrupt that it punished truth-tellers, then I would arm myself with the power to dismantle corruption from the outside. I would become an expert they could not ignore, could not dismiss. I enrolled in a grueling, 2-year program to become a certified fraud examiner. I lived on my dwindling savings and took on miserable, soul-crushing freelance bookkeeping jobs for small businesses, work that barely covered my rent and food. It was a period of immense struggle and profound loneliness. There were countless nights I sat on my floor, surrounded by textbooks, tears of frustration and exhaustion streaming down my face, wanting to give up, to just find another anonymous cubicle and forget I'd ever heard the name Julian Croft. But the memory of his smirk, the feel of that cheap cardboard box in my hands, the sound of the security guard's footsteps behind me, would flash in my mind, and I would pick up the textbook again. I was building a new kind of armor, piece by piece, not out of naive belief, but out of cold, hard, unimpeachable expertise. I was forging a sword from my own broken pieces. I got my certification, the letters CFE after my name feeling like a suit of armor. I applied to one firm, and one firm only, Davies & Crowe, the most prestigious forensic accounting and investigative firm in the country. My interview was with Eleanor Davies herself, a legend in the field, a woman in her 60s with a razor-sharp intellect and a reputation for being utterly uncompromising when it came to the truth. She looked over my resume, her expression giving nothing away. There's a significant gap here, Ms. Rossi, she said, her voice crisp and clear. You were at Croft & Sterling, a reputable firm. Then 2 years of freelance work and education. That's an unusual trajectory. Explain. This was the moment of truth. I could lie, fabricate a story about traveling, about a family illness. Or I could tell her the unvarnished, humiliating truth. I looked her straight in the eye, my back straight, my voice clear and steady, devoid of the tremor that had plagued me in Julian's office. I was fired from Croft & Sterling, Ms. Davies, I said. I was fired because I questioned some accounting practices that I believed, and still believe, were unethical and potentially fraudulent. I was told my integrity was a liability to their corporate culture. I spent the last 2 years ensuring that my integrity, backed by the highest level of professional certification and expertise, would become my greatest, and only, asset. Eleanor Davies was silent for a long, unnerving moment, her sharp eyes studying me, weighing my words, my posture, my very soul. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. Interesting, she said. We've had our eye on Croft & Sterling for some time. A little too slick. A little too profitable in all the wrong areas. A company's culture is set from the top, and a culture that fires people for asking questions is a culture that is hiding something. Integrity, Ms. Rossi, is the only currency we trade in here. Welcome to Davies & Crow. And just like that, the long winter ended. I was no longer Clara Rossi, the disgraced junior accountant. I was Clara Rossi, CFE, senior auditor at Davies & Crow. The uniform of my new profession was a sense of unassailable authority, a badge of credibility that no one could ever take from me. I worked on smaller cases at first, building a reputation for being relentlessly thorough, doggedly persistent, and impeccably, unshakably ethical. I was rebuilding myself, not as the naive girl I was, but as a stronger, wiser, more powerful woman. I was learning to wield my knowledge as a scalpel, not a club. And now, here I was, staring at the client portfolio for Project Phoenix. The target, Croft & Sterling Holdings. The subject of the investigation, Julian Croft. The universe, it seemed, did not believe in coincidence. It believed in justice. The next morning, I walked into the main conference room at Davies & Crow, a space that was the antithesis of Croft & Sterling's opulence. It was modern, minimalist, and functional, with state-of-the-art technology built into every surface. My team was already there, 2 bright, hungry junior analysts, Anya and Mark, who looked at me with a mixture of respect and a healthy dose of trepidation. I had a reputation for being demanding, for my obsessive attention to detail, for my refusal to accept easy answers. On the large smart screen was the Croft & Sterling logo, the very emblem that had once represented my dreams. All right, team, I began, my voice calm, low, and utterly commanding. This is Project Phoenix. This is a Level 1 forensic audit, triggered by multiple, credible whistleblower tips and several concerning anomalies flagged by the SEC. Our mandate is simple, follow the money. Every dollar. I want no stone left unturned, no transaction unexamined. We are looking for inconsistencies, phantom vendors, inflated assets, improper revenue recognition, off-book liabilities, anything and everything that deviates from GAAP and smells even faintly of deception. I walked to the screen and tapped it, my finger landing directly on Julian Croft's name and title. Our primary person of interest is the CFO. We start at the top. We follow the approval chains. We trace the signatures. I want every vendor account he's ever approved cross-referenced with corporate registries, bank records, and known shell company databases. I want to know who these companies are, who really owns them, and where the money ultimately went. Is that clear? For the next 2 weeks, we lived and breathed Croft & Sterling's financial data. It was a vast, digital labyrinth, a maze designed to confuse and misdirect. But I was its architect. I knew its secret passages, its false walls. I guided my team, my intimate, hard-won knowledge of the company's inner workings from my time there proving invaluable. Pull the general ledger for the Orion project from Q2 of 2019, I'd instruct. Now, cross-reference every payment over 50,000 with this list of vendors. And there it was, the same ghost company, Ether Consulting, but now the amounts were larger, the frequency greater, the brazenness breathtaking. We found others, just as I knew we would, Nimbus Holdings, Zephyr Partners. A whole celestial-themed constellation of fake entities, all leading back to electronic approvals from Julian Croft's office. We used specialized software to trace the labyrinthine path of the payments, from Croft and Sterling, to an offshore bank in the Caymans, to a shell company in Luxembourg, and finally, to a secret real estate portfolio, to purchases of fine art, to private jet leases, and to accounts ultimately linked back to Julian Croft and Arthur Finch. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of digital proof. It was a textbook case of large-scale corporate fraud and embezzlement. The day of the on-site interview at Croft and Sterling arrived. This was the climax. This was the moment I had, on some level, been preparing for since the day I was escorted out. I dressed with deliberate care, a tailored, dark navy suit that was both professional and powerfully austere, my hair pulled back into a tight, sleek knot, simple pearl studs in my ears. I looked like the embodiment of judgment. I carried a simple, elegant leather portfolio. Inside was not just the condensed summary of our findings, but the physical manifestation of 2 years of my life, my shame, my struggle, my relentless pursuit of redemption. We were shown into the main boardroom, the very same one where I'd once been publicly humiliated. The view of the city was the same, but it looked different to me now, not a prize to be won, but a landscape to be held accountable. The long, polished mahogany table was the same. The air was still thick with the scent of money and power, but now it smelled like fear. My team and I set up our laptops and documents. We didn't have to wait long. The door opened, and Julian Croft walked in, followed by a pale, nervous-looking corporate lawyer. Julian looked older, more worn. The silver in his hair was still impeccably styled, but the charm was strained, the confidence brittle. The economic climate had shifted, the tides of easy money had receded, and his beautiful, complex house of cards was now exposed to the harsh wind of scrutiny. He was wearing his politician's smile, ready to charm, to obfuscate, to baffle another set of auditors with jargon and corporate double-talk. "Welcome, welcome," he said, his voice smooth, but I detected a faint, new tension underneath. "I'm Julian Croft. We're here to cooperate fully with your investigation, of course. I'm confident we can clear up any of these misunderstandings quickly and efficiently." He hadn't looked directly at me yet. His eyes scanned my team, and he automatically focused on Mark, the male analyst, assuming he was in charge. Then I spoke. My voice was calm, clear, and cut through the room's false bonhomie like a shard of ice. "Thank you for your time today, Mr. Croft. I'm Clara Rossi, the senior auditor leading this investigation for Davies and Crowe." His head snapped toward me as if pulled by a string. The smile froze on his face, then slowly, comically, melted away. His eyes widened in a flash of pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a dawning, cold, stomach-churning horror. He was looking at me, but he was seeing the ghost of the junior accountant he'd fired. He was seeing the woman he'd called a liability, whose career he thought he'd ended. For a full 3 seconds, he was utterly, completely disarmed. The mask of the confident executive fell away, revealing the terrified man beneath. "Clara," he stammered, his composure shattered. I didn't. I wasn't informed that I would be leading this audit?" I finished for him, my tone neutral, professional, devoid of any gloating or emotion. "Yes. Life is full of surprises, isn't it? Now, shall we begin? I'd like to start with some specific questions regarding your personal approval and oversight of several vendor relationships, beginning with Ether Consulting." The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly, grayish pallor. For the next hour, I led the interview. I was cool, precise, and utterly relentless. I was a surgeon, and the evidence was my scalpel. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply laid out the facts, one after another, slide by slide, document by document, building an inescapable prison of numbers and logic around him. I presented the invoices, the bank transfer records, the links between the shell companies, the ultimate destination of the funds. With each question, each new piece of irrefutable evidence, I slid across the polished table towards him. He seemed to shrink in his expensive leather chair. The charismatic high priest was gone, replaced by a cornered, sweating, desperate animal. His lawyer grew increasingly agitated, whispering furiously in his ear, often instructing him not to answer. Finally, Julian could take no more. The pressure, the humiliation, the sheer terror of it all broke him. He slammed his hand flat on the table, the sharp crack echoing in the room. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted, his voice cracking with rage and fear. "A personal vendetta. You're doing this because I fired you. You're trying to destroy me out of spite." The room went dead silent. My team looked at me. The lawyer looked horrified. I simply looked back at him, my expression unchanged, my gaze steady. "This isn't personal, Mr. Croft," I said, my voice soft, yet it carried an immense, crushing weight. "This is professional. You fired me 2 years ago for speaking a truth you didn't want to hear. You called my integrity a liability. Today, I am here to perform my professional duty. And my integrity, the very quality you tried to discard and destroy, is now the only thing standing between you and the full, legal consequences of your actions. This isn't a vendetta. It's called accountability." I closed my portfolio with a soft, final snap. "We have all the information we require for now. You and your counsel will be hearing from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the U.S. Attorney's Office shortly. They have a copy of our preliminary report. Good day, Mr. Croft." We packed our things in silence and walked out. I didn't look back. I walked through the same gleaming lobby, past the same security desk, but this time, my head was high, my back was straight, and I was carrying the power of truth and justice in my leather portfolio, not my shattered dreams in a cardboard box. The fallout was swift, public, and severe. The case made the front page of the Financial Times. Julian Croft and Arthur Finch were indicted on multiple federal counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Croft and Sterling Holdings, its reputation in tatters and its finances eviscerated, was forced into a fire sale and dismantled. The employees who lost their jobs, the shareholders who lost their investments, finally saw a measure of justice. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a deep, profound, and quiet sense of closure. The wound was finally, completely healed, not with the hot fire of revenge, but with the cool, cleansing water of truth and restoration. I had reclaimed my dignity, not by screaming my innocence from the rooftops, but by mastering my craft, by armoring myself in expertise, and by letting the unassailable facts speak for themselves. I had turned my silence into a weapon, and it had struck with the quiet, devastating force of a landslide. A few months later, I was promoted to Director of Forensic Audits at Davies & Crowe. My first official act was to establish a mentorship program for young women entering the field of accounting and finance. I called it the Integrity Initiative. I told them my story. I told them about the cardboard box, and the late night studying, and the importance of holding on to that cold, hard stone of certainty when everyone in power tells you to let go. I still have that jade plant from my old desk. It's on the windowsill in my new, corner office at Davies & Crowe, its leaves a vibrant, resilient green. It's thriving. I look at it sometimes, and I think about the journey. He fired me for speaking up, believing he was silencing me forever, burying an inconvenient truth. But he was wrong. He didn't silence me, he forced me to find a stronger, more powerful voice. He taught me that the truth, no matter how deep you bury it under layers of deceit, complex financial instruments, and corporate authority, is a living thing. It has roots. And eventually, it will push through the cracks, seeking the light. And sometimes, the most powerful stance you can take is not a loud, angry protest in the moment, but a quiet, patient, unwavering commitment to your principles, trusting that in time, the truth will speak for itself. And when it does, it will be a roar that topples giants.